Coming up next on Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable, Governor Doug Ducey announces plans to boost education funding, and the Secretary of State's fight with the Clean Elections Commission ramps up. The Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Steve Goldstein of KJZZ Radio, Bob Christie of the Associated Press, and Luigi Del Puerto of the Arizona Capital Times. Governor Doug Ducey this week announced a plan to increase funding for education. Steve, give us an overview of what's going on here, and we'll try to pick through the weeds a little bit later on. But what's happening here?
Ted, a couple of things going on here. One is that a lot of Arizonans probably in the last 24 hours have learned what the state land trust is. They probably had never heard of it before. Governor Ducey has decided to take a higher percentage of the land trust money that has been going toward education. He's moving it from about 2.5% up to 10% of that endowment for the first 5 years of this plan. The next 5 years it'll go back down, I believe, to 5% from there. So what we have here is Governor Ducey has been hearing the cries. He also heard the numbers this week that Arizona is 50th in state spending on education, and decided this is a plan that would allow him to raise money without raising taxes at the same time. But there are critics out there.
No doubt. This will increase school funding per student by about $300. He's tapping into the $5.1 billion cash value of the state land trust. He is essentially going to draw down about $2 billion of that over this 10-year period, $2.2 billion over the 10-year period. They say that after 5 years, it'll still be about the same, maybe $5.3 billion instead of $7 billion. So this is a permanent trust that's supposed to be there. It's been there for 102 years already. It's supposed to last as long as Arizona's here to create a dedicated funding stream for schools. The governor says we need the money now. We need to quicken the pace of payouts.
Right. As Tom pointed out, this proposal would need the approval of both the legislature, and because it's going to be an amendment to the state constitution, it would need the voters' approval as well. So this will happen. This will start assuming the voters approve it in next year, in 2016, the funding stream will start in the next fiscal year.
And again, right now we're taking 2.5%, correct, out of the state land trust, and that was kind of a steady deal. It kind of ebbed and flowed, but that was steadied by Doug Ducey.
When he was state treasurer,
yes. Exactly.
And one other thing to point out, Ted, I wanted to go back to the criticism of this. It hasn't been that loud yet. Andrew Morrill of the Arizona Education Association expressed some concerns. We don't really know what's in the plan. Earlier today, I talked with Anne-Eve Peterson, who led the fight to get the temporary sales tax made permanent. Doug Ducey, when he was treasurer, was leading the pack against this. And she says it's smoke and mirrors. She says it is a bait and switch, and he's touching this trust that shouldn't have been touched. And she's saying this is just his way, again, of not raising taxes. So there are critics.
10% out of the fund cuts principal quite a bit. I mean, this is not the 4% rule that we hear about regarding taking out of trust funds and such.
Correct.
This is 10% for 5 years. It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. It's like your 401k fund. Consider it as that. When you retire, you can start pulling out 4 or 5% a year out of your 401k fund, and the principal remains there and will continue to allow you to take that amount over your retirement. It's the same principle with the trust land fund. The trust land fund is supposed to spin off a certain amount of money every year that goes to schools. Right now, it's been about $80 million a year. The governor wants to boost that by between $320 and $375 million over this 5 years in each of those years, and draw down about $2 billion of the fund.
That is why there are critics to this proposal. Also, that is why it's temporary. It's 5-year drawdown of 10%, and then goes to 5%, and then the end of the 10th year goes back to 2.5%. The presumption is that this trust fund cannot sustain a 10% drawdown every year in perpetuity.
Right, and there's going to be a big cliff there, because the first 5 years they're drawing down 10% of the fund. It'll be about $350 million on average. Then they've drawn down enough principal. When they go to 5%, it's only going to be about $100 million more a year. So the excess funding to schools is not going to be that great once the governor's been in office about 7 years.
Supporters, though, of this, including the governor, obviously, say that this money is just sitting there. Obviously, it's working, but it is there. It's available. It makes no sense when the state is so strapped in terms of education, and apparently we are not going to raise taxes. It makes no sense. Let's use it.
As Bob said, though, this has been in effect for nearly 103 years now at this point, and it's supposed to be living for another century or so. So it's also supposed to be something that you're not really supposed to risk. One angle I find interesting, though, Ted, is that, again, a lot of people, as I said, didn't really think about the state land trust. Doug Ducey, having been the state treasurer, knew about this. There were some who were wondering, was this something that had been brewing even during the campaign, but he didn't want to talk about it.
Well, that's a good point. My question is, and again, there are folks who are saying this is a brilliant political move because you aren't raising taxes. You've got all this money, and now you can get it over by 2017 into the classrooms, and they're praising the governor for this. Why didn't previous governors do this?
Well, it's been talked about for the last year and a half or so by several people who I've talked to in my reporting. Chuck Coughlin, a Big Jan Brewer supporter for many years. The problem was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there was only $2 billion, $2.5 billion in this fund, and you couldn't have done that because the recession had hit. They lost value in property, they lost value in equities, and they were hit as bad as anybody else. They've since recovered. They're at $5.1 billion now. It's projected to grow to $7 billion within 2 years. That's going to really, or within 5 years, it's really come back and is ready to be able to ripe for picking in the governor's view.
Now, I've talked to several leaders, public education advocates, and they are cautiously welcoming this proposal. They see the need for more K-12 funding, and this is what it does. It will bring in more money. The criticisms that I'm hearing are essentially twofold. One is that it's temporary, which means it's not a long-term fix to the problems in K-12 and higher education funding. And two, you're facing cliffs. I talked to one superintendent from from Phoenix this afternoon. She said, well, you know what, this is great, but we have to plan really carefully because 90% of our budget goes to people, and those people help our school make our school better. And if we're cutting, by going down to 100 million by the fifth year, I mean, what are we going to do? How are we going to pull back our spending at that point?
The governor's office does craft or describe this plan as in their view, as a long-term plan. It's a 10-year plan. They say, well, a new governor after 10 years could renew it. The economy will probably be better. Taxes will be back up. Of course, in the meantime, Governor Ducey has pledged to cut taxes in every year of his term. So, whether those monies really show up and are there, we'll have to wait and see.
And it puts in doubt the K-12 education commitment because, again, you have this lawsuit hanging over, which has been appealed. When is the state going to pay back that money, if in fact it has to? So, as Bob said, it's a temporary plan that they say is long-term, but it still sort of makes people wonder, well, you're not going to raise taxes at all. Things get more expensive as the years go by.
And we should mention this is separate and apart from that K-12 funding suit.
Completely separate and apart, except twice during the governor's talk yesterday, he mentioned the K-12 lawsuit. He said this could be a pathway to settlement of the K-12 lawsuit. Now, right now, a court has ordered the state to pay $336 million in this year, and starting June 1st, another $334 million. So we're talking about $1.5 billion over 5 years that are owed already. Have been ordered to the judge. They've been in mediation. Whether the governor thinks that offering money 2.5 years from now, if the voters approve it, will settle it, I don't know if that's what he's saying.
And really, that's a key point you mentioned, because the education community doesn't want this money to be supplanting money, meaning money that then just replace what's supposed to be owed to the schools to begin with. And it's funny because obviously the education community needs the money. They want this money. One thing that they do want to see are details. And I talked to Chuck Essex, for example, a school finance expert, and he's saying it's really technical, but he's saying we want to also see how this is going to be distributed. Is it going to be distributed through the usual formula? Are there going to be strings attached to it? Are there going to be mandates? And we want this to be as broadly distributed as possible.
I think Diane Douglas came out today. Diane Douglas' office came out today with some of those same questions, especially distribution.
Right, and Andrew Morrill, who heads the teachers union, the Arizona Education Association, made it clear yesterday. He says that's what his concern is the governor has a reform agenda for education outside of this funding plan. He wants to funnel more money into high-performing schools, replicate them. He wants to remove teachers and principals from low-performing schools. He wants to completely revamp the school funding formula. So if you distribute it to winners and then there's losers, that's what his concern is. He wants everyone to get the same amount of money, Mr. Morrill, under the old formula, so that there aren't winners and losers.
I think this is a crossroads too for the business community to some extent, because they've come out really enthusiastically for this. Glenn Hammer, of course, of the Chamber of Commerce says, oh, this is a terrific plan. Todd Sanders of the Greater Phoenix Chamber loves it too. But if we come down to, of course, drawing jobs through education, if you're just treading water, does it look like that to other states and other businesses?
Before we go, real quickly, you started off by saying that people have learned more about the state land trust proceeds than they ever have. A quick overview. How does it work? How long has it been in place? What is it designed to do?
When Arizona became a state, the year before, the federal government deeded 1 out of every 35 parcels to the state as a permanent land endowment to fund schools, universities, and a bunch of other smaller things. That's been around for 102 years. When those parcels are sold, the cash goes into a permanent land trust. And that money, the interest from that money, goes to the beneficiaries. 93% of it goes to the K-12 schools, which is what we're talking about.
Okay, and again, the governor thinks the fund will increase to $5.4 billion by FY21, even with this going on.
Even with this, but it would be $7 billion if he didn't.
Yes, there you go. Okay. There's always that if in there, isn't there? All right, Steve, Michelle Reagan is a Secretary of State, and she was a kind of a crusader against dark money as a lawmaker. Seems like she's changing positions quite a bit as Secretary. What's going on here?
She apparently has decided the Clean Elections Commission is overstepping its bounds in terms of how it's determining what independent expenditure groups can spend. One in particular, which has had issues with the Clean Elections Commission, was a group that spent some money to go against then gubernatorial candidate Scott Smith, who was a former mayor of Mesa. An administrative law judge said, no, the group, what they did was okay. Clean Elections is appealing this. Michelle Reagan's team is saying, wait a second, we don't think you can appeal. We think you're overstepping your bounds. And Tom Collins of Clean Elections is saying, well, who are you to tell us to do that? So there's a lot of fighting right there.
This was Legal Foundation Action Fund, again, ran this anti-Scott Smith ad very late, they said it was issue advocacy. They did not say it was campaign spending. Clean Elections says, no, that's and they fined them.
Right. They fined them because Clean Elections Commission concluded that it wasn't issue advocacy. It's electioneering. It's electioneering because they said the timing of the ad, the content of the ad, the way it was portrayed, the way it went after Scott Smith, they all pointed to the fact that this is an electioneering campaign. I mean, those ads attacked Scott Smith for being the president, the head of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. But it was so close to his announcing that he was running for governor, and the test is that what would a reasonable voter think once that person sees that ad? Is it really issue advocacy or is it electioneering? Well, Clean Election Commission said it is electioneering and not issue advocacy.
And we should mention Secretary of State Ken Bennett at the time agreed. He thought that it was issue advocacy and dismissed all this. Clean Election says no, and they're fighting this. And now Michelle Reagan, Secretary of State, she's siding with the group.
She is. And this fight between Clean Elections and the Secretary of State, and in a broader sense, the Republicans in the state legislature and the governor's office, et cetera, goes back about three years now. Clean Elections used to have a matching funds provision to where if you were a Clean Elections candidate and you were running against a non-Clean Elections candidate and they spent more, you would get matching funds. Well, that was struck down by the Supreme Court. And so a lot of the mission of Clean Elections went away. Well, Clean Elections looked at the law that created them and said, you know what, we have authority under the voter-approved law to enforce all election laws, not just these ones about matching funds. Well, that's caused big problems for the Republicans, and that's what this fight is all about. Clean Elections says we have the power to do this. Michelle Reagan and other Republicans say no.
The Secretary of State's office says we're the ones who are supposed to be overseeing campaigns.
Well, and Clean Elections, and what Bob said is absolutely on the mark. The Clean Elections says, wait a second, based on this voter-approved initiative, we have this power rather than you. Ted, also, to come back to Michelle Reagan, I found this interesting. As someone who really campaigned hard against dark money, and now she's at least getting the reputation as someone who is now saying dark money is okay. It reminds me back with the Medicaid expansion vote, when there was that group of moderate Republicans who basically stood up and said, yes, we want to go ahead with this, we support the governor on this. Michelle Reagan was one that said, she was almost like the John Kerry criticism, I voted before I voted against it kind of thing. So there's an inconsistency there.
Right, but Michelle Reagan really is taking a side on this one, but the larger issues Bob pointed out, it's really the authority of the Clean Elections Commission. I think what's happening is we have a two-pronged enforcement system in the state, and unless the court decides which one gets to enforce which laws, we are going to have this conflict between the Clean Elections Commission and the Secretary of State's office in the next several election cycles.
And we should say Secretary of State Reagan wants to intervene now in the lawsuit, which was, again, concerning judicial overreach as far as clean elections is concerned. But Bob, recently Michelle Reagan announced, at least her office announced, that they were going to stop enforcing certain election laws because they found them unconstitutional. Not a judge. They found them unconstitutional.
That's correct. It's an unusual way to go about doing things. Usually, if you think a law is unconstitutional, you go to the judge. In this case, Michelle Reagan and her chief election attorney looked at the law that requires the Secretary of State to inform candidates when they're attacked by someone outside. And what this does is it's kind of a trigger that says, hey, someone spent $100,000 against you. Here's your notice. And it gives them time to respond so that they're not blindsided 2 days before the election and have no chance to respond. Michelle Reagan and her attorney looked at that. Eric Spencer, who's the elections director, said, no, we think that law is unconstitutional, and we're just not going to deal with it anymore.
Which, you know, the immediate reaction from people is that, what is going on here? What is the authority? What makes the Secretary of State's office think or believe that they have the authority to suspend enforcement of a law just because they think it's not constitutional? And Tim Hogan said, you know, we didn't elect a judge when we elected Michelle Reagan. We elected an executive officer.
And because of this, critics say that, you know, candidates might not be able to see the hit coming anymore. They wouldn't know who paid for it, and they won't have time to rebut. I mean, that's a triple whammy right there.
It is. You know, one thing that always strikes me, though, Ted, about our election laws is that in the case of Tom Horne, when he was running for Attorney General, we almost basically found out that Tom Horne was going to be penalized for this after Tom Horne was already defeated in the primary 4 years later. So there's a lack of effectiveness on this. That doesn't excuse Michelle Reagan, but there are complications at this point.
And we should mention real quickly, Behavior Research Center just released a poll regarding it, and the approval rating for the governor and the legislature, not good, not bad, not, you know, atrocious, but not good.
No, not good. And, you know, it's been a tough year for the governor and the legislature. You know, the legislature generally isn't held in great regard anyway. We have a new governor. He had to make a lot of cuts. He had to cut universities. That got a lot of press. The K-12 people, the flat or negative spending to K-12 was a big factor, I think.
But you look at deeper down into the survey, and transparency in government was listed as a very important factor for the respondents. And when you talk about stuff like this, especially what's coming out of the Secretary of State's office, the dark money issue in general, transparency is nowhere to be found.
Well, really, this is a big issue that the state is grappling with. The issue is that what do you do with nonprofits? Some of them just sprouted, you know, weeks or months before an election, started spending a whole lot of money, and then they turn around and claim that, no, we are not doing electioneering, we're doing issue advocacy, we're doing education, voter outreach, those kinds of activities. The question is, how do you enforce the law? And how do you go after them? How do you prove that they're doing electioneering? A job traditionally fell on the Secretary of State's office to do. Now the Clean Elections Commission is saying, well, we're part of that too. We can enforce the law and make sure that those guys are following the law and reporting and you know, doing what's necessary.
Okay.
Which makes some sense because the Secretary of State's office is a partisan office. Clean Elections is split between both parties. There's a commission. There's 5 folks on it. I'm independent, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. So maybe that takes some of the politics out of this.
Before we go, we got to talk about the doctors suing over an Arizona abortion law, this new state law regarding doctors telling patients of the possibility of a reverse abortion. Doctors are saying, we're the doctors here. You're making us lie to our patients. Is that what's going on here?
Well, and Planned Parenthood and the ACLU came out really swinging on this one as well, calling this junk science, saying there have been very few cases of this. There are not any studies, at least peer-approved studies, that have said this is the fact. One doctor that I had heard from said that since this is a 2-step process, if in fact you can reverse it in the course between the 2 doses of progesterone at that point. So it's very confusing as to how it works out. It does sound like a case, though, where Center for Arizona Policy, Kathy Herod, went to Doug Ducey and said, we like this, here's the science, please approve this.
You know, I followed this all the way through the legislature. There was one doctor who testified, and he says, I have one patient who came to me who had been given the abortion drug RU46, and I immediately gave her a big dose of progesterone, and now she has a 6-month-old baby. Anecdotal evidence, no proof. This is the first doctor in the whole United States, as far as I know, that was ever said anything like this. And the legislature, the Republicans who are anti-abortion in the legislature embraced him and put that part of the law on. Now, I think it stands a very good chance of having a federal judge agree with Planned Parenthood on their challenge.
And doctors are also saying it violates their First Amendment rights with being able to tell their patients, and violates the 14th Amendment right for the patients because they're being told misleading, false information.
That's precisely the argument. The arguments against this law. One is that it compels doctors to relay this information that they believe is false, and two, it may potentially put them on the hook for medical malpractice. If the things that they are relaying, the information they're relaying turns out to be false, then they're saying, well, you know, what happens if we get sued?
Yeah, and what happens to your board certification if you are giving out information that the board would think is not accurate?
This is a case where Arizona is a leader and probably shouldn't want to be based on what the medical community is saying.
All right, we got to stop it right there, gentlemen. Good stuff. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Monday on Arizona Horizon, 3 state historians will join us for their unique and often quirky perspectives on Arizona's equally colorful past. That's Monday, 5:30 and 10. Right here on Arizona Horizon. Tuesday, we'll update a national push for nonpartisan elections. Wednesday, hear about an effort to offer free summer school to help low-income students. Thursday, we'll talk about a book that looks beyond the economic value of water. And Friday, it's another edition of the Journalists Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening and a great weekend.
Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.